I'd just come up with a proposal for a program of work that was worth millions of dollars, took it to the boss, pitched it, and he said, well, we're going to have to put Andrew in front of this because people won't take it seriously coming from a young woman. When women are given feedback, they're given feedback to be more like men. You need to be more direct. Oh, you're coming across pretty aggressive. You need to stand up and be more confident. Oh, you seem really arrogant. Women are being trained to be like little men. When you take the action, you're collecting evidence of success. But when you don't take the action, you're collecting evidence of failure. And so it's very easy when your inner critic is going crazy in the background to not do things and to not speak up.
What does it take to be a financially empowered woman? And what can financially empowered women do together to change the world? A shocking statistic is that around 400,000 women in Australia are at risk of homelessness. And the cause of this is the lack of education about how to build a financial foundation, starting even before we first enter the workforce and well into our retirement years. My name's Dion Payne, and I'm the founder of the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm passionate about ending homelessness, and as part of that passion, I chose to look at the systemic barriers that are causing homelessness for women in the first place. The Financially Empowered Women podcast is designed to bring you the best experts from around the world to increase your financial know-how and give you practical and women-specific tips to overcome the challenges you might be facing, such as how to negotiate a better salary, demystifying super, or how to navigate a separation and ensure the assets are distributed fairly. My role is to provide you with the best information out there to change your trajectory and become a financially empowered woman, because you deserve it, and the world needs you more than ever to own your worth and help others to do the same.
Hello and welcome to the Financially Empowered Woman podcast. My name's Dion Payne, and today I'm joined by Bron Stephens. Let me tell you a little bit about Bron. Bron is a leadership strategist and executive coach known for bringing clarity, confidence and personal power to high-performing women across Australia. A former CEO with more than 2 decades leading global teams of up to 500 people and managing portfolios worth more than 500 million, Bron has built her career dismantling outdated leadership models from the inside, and now she works with women to do the same without losing themselves in the process. Welcome, Bron.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you today.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time. This is great. I read your bio and I just think, my God, you're a powerhouse. Like, where did you get started?
I was one of those people who I want to be a CEO when I grew up. And I never really understood that the highest ambition that was held for me was like a PA by my family, because that was the times we grew up in. And so, you know, when I actually got to early adulthood and started in leadership careers and down leadership pathways, I remember distinctly this conversation with my mum, like, when did you know you wanted to be more than a PA? And I was like, whoa, when did you think I was going to stop at being a PA? And so I just kind of took off down a pathway of leadership and loved it, and was just an awful leader, I might add, when I first started, because leadership development's come a long way in the last 20 years. But that sort of led me down opportunity to opportunity, some good leaders in there helped to develop me, some bad leaders in there taught me some great lessons. And I think that I've been very fortunate to create and find opportunities over my career that sort of led me into this end position of leading really large teams and really big portfolios that give you a very different perspective.
Ooh, that sounds juicy. A different perspective in what way?
I think it's so easy when you're running down a leadership pathway and you get that tap on your shoulder every 18 months or 2 years to go, ooh, next level's ready for you, and you step up. You can very quickly disconnect from the human side of what you're doing. And I think depending on the leaders around you and the development you're getting through that, it's very easy to get task-oriented and focused on delivering things rather than caring for people. And for me, I've always been a people-first leader. It hasn't always shown up that way, and I've done a lot of development over my time around that, and a lot of fighting the system and dismantling the system around that. Oh, we think about the customer and the bottom line first. And my approach is like, no, we think about our people first, because if they're happy, they'll deliver great results, which will give us happy customers, which will give us great financials. But if we're not thinking about humans, we're not thinking about it right. And then, you add a little gendered overlay on that, and it becomes really different again, because it becomes that, well, you're too soft, you need to be more ruthless, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I just need to be me. Like, we just need to dismantle this leadership system that's built by men and for men over centuries, and sometimes to deliberately exclude women, to become, hey, just turn up and be a good person and a good leader and understand what that means and get great results as an outcome of that.
I got a bit triggered when you said to deliberately exclude women. And I tend to think of companies and, sort of these old institutions and politics and things like that. I tend to think of it in terms of systems that were created for men, and they didn't really think of women in the first place, and they're still running these outdated models. I'd never really thought of them as deliberately excluding women. What did you see that led you to that impression?
Yeah, so there's a number of things. There's a really interesting book called Women and Power by Mary Beard that talks about the silencing and exclusion of women over centuries and, thousands of years, essentially, since Homer's Odyssey. And I think when you look at phases of human development and work development, there was a very deliberate period in the early 1900s where the working world, the corporate world, actually very deliberately started to design to exclude women, because women were starting to want to be involved and stick their head up and stick their hands up. And it was made deliberately difficult and deliberately unwelcoming for them. And, relevant to the financial institution side, you've got 50 years of women having financial autonomy. And that is a deliberate exclusion of women from the ability to start a business, to own a house, to run their own finances. And so there was a real deliberateness about that.
And if I'm going to be really honest with how I feel about that, it feels quite painful. Like, sometimes when I think of, okay, well, the systems haven't evolved, I can kind of blame it on a sort of a culture almost. But when you say women are deliberately excluded, somebody or some people made that decision, which is quite evil.
It is, yeah. And if we give generous intent to that, I don't think they were thinking of it from an evil lens at the time. I think they were thinking of it from a patriarchal lens, where they were very comfortable with the power that they had, the status quo, their wives at home, everything ran seamlessly for them. So why would they want anything to change? And potentially had wives at home who were saying, this is great, this is as it should be. I want to stay home, I want to look after your children, as still happens today, right? And there was a lack of understanding that there could and should be space for both.
Yes. So, this is great, because what we're talking about at the moment is outdated leadership models. I'm really curious as well, when you were working there, did you have, sort of in the roles that you had, did you see that there were those glass ceilings? And from what I know about you, I can't imagine that you would put up with that.
Not a huge fan of a glass ceiling, and certainly my career tells a story of success and breaking through those barriers and doing those things. I think I certainly existed within outdated leadership models and within heavily gendered spaces. So, I was turned down for my first ever job because I was told I was going to marry an army boy and leave town. I was living in Townsville, and that's what you did when you were young and in Townsville. And then I remember, I'd just come up with a proposal for a program of work that was worth millions of dollars, $14 million for the organisation, and took it to the boss, pitched it, and he said, well, we're going to have to put Andrew in front of this because people won't take it seriously coming from a young woman. And the mental table flip that happened in that moment was quite extreme, but the polite and pointed conversation that followed certainly got my message across. But it was,
I love that.
it was one of those moments where you just think to yourself, is this real? Is this a real conversation in an organisation in which every women's toilet, every men's toilet had White Ribbon Day sponsorship, had, talk about our equality, push the stats of how great we were at, going for gender equity and equality. And I was like, that's not the lived experience of women in this organisation. And walking out of my office and overhearing someone saying to another male colleague, I reckon she's about a 7. And I was like, what? And he wasn't facing me. And I said, she's a 7 out of what and in what context? And he said, oh, no, it's fine, nothing. And I was like, no, I'm very curious. What is she a 7 in? And he said, I don't want to talk about it, and walked off. And his colleague said he was rating women and their appearance. And I was like, we have a problem, right? And so I think that those experiences are not uncommon. I would like them to be uncommon, but they're not. And even at their most diluted, even at their best case scenario, what I see through my own experience and the experience of others is this really heavily gendered feedback. So women in the workplace, let me go back a little. Because women work in male-dominated spaces where 70 to 80% of the leadership and the successful leadership at the most senior levels are men, that's the role model for success. And so you think what those men are doing is the right and the only way to do it, because that's what you see. And so when women are given feedback, they're given feedback to be more like men. You need to be more direct. Oh, you're coming across pretty aggressive. You need to stand up and be more confident. Oh, you seem really arrogant. And there's this constant gender tension that comes into that I think people aren't really aware of. And it's because women are being trained to be like little men, and we're not little men, we're women. And so seeing that, understanding that, breaking that down, and helping women to unravel those decades at times of feedback to actually stop trying to be a little man and lead fully like themselves in a way that feels good, in a way that tackles the inner critic that's, running on default inside, that puts them back in ownership of their personal power, is really important.
Yeah, and that's really beautiful. And I think, number one, I would love to have been a fly on the mental wall when you flipped the table.
It was quite dramatic, I'll let you know.
And then I just think of how else women are discriminated against in these kinds of environments. So, I mean, it's bad enough that we do get this gendered feedback, but then taking that home, and then often women do the lion's share of the home labour. It's just, the word that came to me was, it's just exhausting.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I always think, imagine going to work and for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, depending on your role and what you do and how many hours you decide to work, you're pretending to be someone else. You're showing up in a way that feels pretty crap. You've got your inner critic inside saying you're doing a crap job, you look ugly, you're fat, this is awful, you did a terrible thing there, you're never going to be successful, who do you think you are? So you've got, 8, 10, 12 hours of that, and then you go home and you've got to switch into loving mother or loving partner or loving friend, you know, show up for everyone else, clean the house, look at, like, you know, there's no grace in there for how tiring, how exhausting, how full on that is. And then if you add in you don't have a partner, well, you have to leave at 5 o'clock to get to kids pick up before 6. And your male colleagues are left behind going, oh, well, I see she's left early again. You know, and whether or not they're saying that, your inner critic's telling you that's what they're saying. So you feel the pressure to go home and prove that you're online. So then you're working when you get home. Like, it's just awful. It is exhausting.
Yeah. And, you know, all the while your male colleagues are going out for beers afterwards, you know, playing golf, building that social capital, which you as a woman don't have access to because of all of the other stuff that you're having to do. So that sounds pretty crap, to be fair. So, I'm putting that so mildly. Yeah. What is the antidote?
Yeah. So I think the antidote, so I will very clearly say my work is not centered around unravelling the home life side. I think there are some great experts working in that space. I don't have children, and so I don't pretend to speak for women with children. But in terms of a work front, I think that there's two sides, right? There's building male allies and understanding in men of those gendered differences. And I think that men are not willfully ignorant, but they are ignorant at times, you know? And they've been brought up where they haven't seen it, they haven't lived it, they haven't experienced it necessarily. And then they marry a woman who perhaps is happy to be at home and provide that support to them, which is wonderful for them. But Mary sitting beside them doesn't have that. And so just that shared conversation and experience without aggression, without blame, without, you know, putting up walls is really important. And then building that understanding that, hey, just because what we see now as our male role models in leadership doesn't make that right. You know, I always say when allies ask me what they can do to support women in the workplace, I'm like, understand that just because the role models in leadership that you see are male and work in a certain way doesn't mean that's the only way or that that's the right way. There are other ways, and acknowledging that women can bring that is what being an ally is about.
That's awesome. If you've been watching the news lately, it's easy to feel a sense of despair. Between power-hungry global leaders and absolute chaos and division, it can feel like things are spiraling out of control. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and just to have a sense of powerlessness. But there is a way to push back. We can stop looking at what they are doing and start looking at what we can do. At Women for Homes, we firmly believe that where we put our money is making a choice for the kind of world that we want to live in. Our mission is powerful: to mobilise 1 million women to invest $5,000 to end homelessness by 2030 whilst being financially empowered along the way. It's practical, it's tangible, it's something that we can do now, and it's something that we can do to take our power back. Join us at www.womenforhomes.com. That's women4homes.com. I kind of want to, challenge is not quite the right word, but the thought that came to me was you can't be what you can't see. So if the predominant model is the sort of, you know, the male, 70% male leadership, for women and men who are allies, if that's what they're seeing, how do they know that there's something different?
And that is the work that I do. Thank you for the segue. And so I think you can't be what you can't see, right? And when you see a lot of female leaders also showing up like men and male leaders showing up like men, it gets very easy to get drawn into that. But when you develop women to understand what they want for their future, what matters to them and their values, and deeply matters to them and their values, what it looks like when they're living them and not living them, both to themselves and to other people, what their intention is showing up as in the perception of others, because we have these blind spots that are created over time through all the way from childhood through to adult development when we're getting feedback that is inaccurate. So going, hey, if this is your intention, let's talk about what that actually looks like to other people. And then unravelling that inner critic. What is happening behind the scenes that's tearing you down, silencing you, stopping you from putting your name in the ring, preventing you from naming your ambition proudly? And then what is the action plan that you want to put in place to get there? And doing that creates this really powerful structure that hands women back confidence and personal power. And when you train women up in that way and develop them in that way, train's not the right word, but develop them in that way, you have the opportunity to see those female role models being wholly themselves, being appropriately authentic, using their authenticity as a superpower, not as an excuse. And I think there's power in that.
Yeah, and I like what you have to say about developing women to access their personal power. I wonder how that goes in companies where, as we were talking about before, there's a status quo and they don't really like the idea of and not necessarily just women, just anybody being powerful. And so some leaders can be scared of that.
Mm. And I think that's where the allies come into it, right? Women don't need to be empowered. We're already powerful. But we do need people to hold space for us when there isn't space available. And that's the allies. And there are a lot of them now. There are a lot more allies in the workplace now than probably ever before. And I think we need to nurture and grow those allies because we need them to hold the space and create the space. And certainly I've had in my leadership career a number of allies who held and created space for me to be able to step in and be myself. And I've seen leaders, myself included, but many others as well, who show up in those ways, and they are the epitome of success in leadership. But it is creating that space.
That's beautiful. And I loved also what you had to say about being connected to your values. So you help women to be connected to their values and lead from that place as well. I certainly know what it's like when I've not worked in alignment with my values. And how painful that's been. The experiences that come from that have been quite painful, which is why now I'm like, I wouldn't get involved in something if it wasn't aligned with my values, because I know what destruction and devastation it's going to cause.
Yep, 100%. And I think we get trapped by this scarcity mindset, right? Or this fear of what's beyond, or the bias that's telling us that where we are is safe and what we don't know isn't. To go, well, at least I know that where I am right now is really awful, and so I'll just stay here and do this. And I'm like, well, you're way out of alignment with your values. You're working somewhere where there are no allies, where you are being actively discriminated against, not just quietly behind the scenes, but people are actively discriminating against you. You have the power to change that. I talk a lot about the circle of control. And so you've got your circle of control around your mindset, your action, your beliefs, your, decisions in there. You've got your circle of influence that goes around that, where you have the opportunity to influence others and influence things around you. And then you have what's completely out of your control. And I go, are you going to be the person who reshapes an entire organisation? No, is the answer. Unless you have people you can influence to work with you to do that, you cannot control the entire organisation. So why would you stay there? But I think people get this mindset of like, well, every organisation's like that. And I'm like, they are not. They are not all like that. And so I think that it's about recognising that. And when you have that anchor to your values, when you have that anchor to what you want for your life, you can actually go and start to get it. and chase what you want rather than just staying stuck where you are.
Yeah, and it makes me think a friend of mine, she started a new role in an organisation, and it became really clear that her manager, at the very least, was disinterested in her. And at the sort of very most, she was actively out to try and sabotage her because she was scared that, my opinion, she was scared that my friend was, going to take over her job or take, in some way, intimidated by her. And so it was really interesting to see over the weeks, and, me and my friend would catch up and I'd be like, oh, so how's it going with work? And the situation was not getting better. And it took a long time for my friend to sort of just go, yeah, this situation isn't going to get better. And so for her, she's like, well, I'm in a new job. I should just try harder. And, maybe I just need to be more accommodating to bring her around. And then it became just untenable for her to be in that role because she'd have to have a complete personality change to be able to make it work, to be able to appease this person. So, she did eventually come to the realization that the only thing that she could change was herself. She couldn't change how this person was acting towards her, and just that clash was just too much. So, and I, that was one friend in one period of time, and I'm sure these kinds of conversations and activities are happening across workforces all over the place.
Yeah, I talk about it with women all of the time, right? Is this tension of where does my sphere of control, circle of influence stop, and how do I decide that it's time to go or stay? And it's a hard decision to make, right? Especially if you don't know your values, especially if you don't know what you actually want. If you don't have that clarity to start from, deciding whether or not something's right or wrong is really hard because you're like, well, I don't know what I actually want. And then having the right conversation. So if your sphere of influence says that you can have a good conversation with that person, i.e., hey, I wanted to let you know that sometimes I feel really uncomfortable in these specific situations because of these specific things. Is there something that I should be aware of from your side that we could resolve? And I go, if you've got someone who's not interested in that conversation, who's got a power play, who wants to hold power over you, you're not going to get anywhere. And they're the people you don't want to work for. They're the ones who've got a scarcity mindset, who are hoarding power, who are wielding their power over other people. So it's about developing and finding people who want to have power with you and allow you to have power within yourself.
Yeah, beautiful. You talk a lot about the inner critic, and I know that that's something that could run the show in my life if I let it. Sometimes it can just get a bit over the top, and I'm like, okay, back off.
Yeah, calm down. I hear that.
So what are some strategies? Talk a little bit about the inner critic and then some strategies to just get it to calm the F down.
Yeah. I will do my best not to say the F word here, but our inner critics are hardwired from childhood, right? They were coping mechanisms that we developed through our childhood based on caveman instincts. Because if we got kicked out of the tribe when we were back in caveman days, we would die. We wouldn't have access to food. We wouldn't have access to protection. And so our inner critic was developed to protect us and to keep us safe. And over millennia, it's got overactive. And depending on our childhood experiences, our workplace experiences, how we've grown up in leadership, our inner critic can get absolutely bonkers and can just be running on default constantly in the background without you ever noticing. And the work is not to shut it up or to silence it or to get rid of it, because it's just not possible. It is always going to be there. And I do this work constantly on myself and with my clients, and my inner critic is still there. But the trick is that you get to know it So really recognize whose voice is it, what does it sound like, what is its key phrases, when does it come up the most, what is it trying to protect you from, and really start to understand what your inner critic is doing in the background so that you can begin to become aware of it. And the more aware of it you become, the easier it is to take it off default mode. And so I was literally writing about this morning. I was giving a presentation on the inner critic last year, and I was wearing a pair of brand new leopard print sneakers, and I was feeling pretty good about it until I got up there. And then my inner critic was like, look at those shoes, you loser. People are going to think you're a tryhard. And I was just laughing at myself because I was like, what was that like? And also, these shoes are freaking cool. Like, but it's still there. It's still this automatic voice that just wants to find fault and throw things up that are going to throw you off your game. And so I know my inner critic pretty well at this point, but it is a practice to get to know it and to become aware of it. And then when you become aware of it, you celebrate. So you give yourself a little moment of like, heck yes, like I see you, ha ha ha.
You didn't get me this time.
And as silly as it sounds, right? It's actually your inner critic going like, you look silly, don't do that. So you're rewiring your neural pathways with this little energy reward, this little bit of movement, this little bit of celebration to change the way that your inner critic defaults. And then you take a deep breath and you move on. You take the action, because when you take the action, you're collecting evidence of success. But when you don't take the action, you're collecting evidence of failure. And so it's very easy when your inner critic is going crazy in the background to not do things and to not speak up, to not put your hat in the ring, to not take a risk. And then your inner critic is like, see, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. But when you say something, even if what you say is not right, you've then got, look at how brave you were. You spoke up. Okay, it didn't go really well. We can do better next time. But it's giving you data points of success. And so all of this work is grounded around self-compassion, around emotional agility, and around self-awareness. But until we have that fundamental self-awareness that this is happening in the background, we can't interrupt it. And so I'm really passionate about it because I think that so many people have this running constantly, this constant stream of negativity. And I hear all the time, oh my God, my mental health improved in 2 weeks. I'm like, yes, it'll do that. Because suddenly you're not just flogging yourself every time you misspeak or every time something goes wrong. And you can have a little laugh about, yep, okay, my shoes are not actually that bad, mate. I think they're pretty cool, whatever it is. But yeah, and it's a massive thief of women's personal power. So very passionate about this one.
Yeah, beautiful. Just those times that I am critical of myself. It's such a what I'm trying to say is I can see certainly in the past where I've been super critical of myself, beating myself up and how not great for my mental health that is, compared to most days for me now. It's like, yes, okay, there might be a little voice there, but I can sort of get it to go away pretty quickly or laugh at it pretty quickly. But I do remember somebody saying, if you had a friend that spoke to you in the way that you speak to yourself, you wouldn't be their friend. It's just, yeah. So why we keep this voice running in ourselves? But as you said, the first step is awareness and just knowing that is something that is on in the background, and having that awareness can stop it from running the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a whole heap of deeper self-compassion exercises that kind of sit behind this work, because sometimes it's not going to shift easily. And we have this belief that our inner critic is keeping us safe because that's what it was designed to do, right? So our brain is not incorrect in that, but it's just keeping us safe in ways that are unhelpful, or trying to keep us safe in ways that are unhelpful. And so when it gets out of control, there's value in going and writing a letter to yourself like you would if you were writing to a friend or loved one. Or, giving yourself some self-soothing touch with a little hug or a hand rub, which I do all the time in meetings when I'm feeling nervous. If anyone ever sees me, they're like, she looks like, Monty Burns. Like, but there's real value in those acts of bigger self-compassion as well, to try and change that dialogue of, it has a purpose, it's keeping me safe, it's driving me forward, it's making me successful, it's doing all of these things. And I'm like, it's not. I know that's what your brain is telling you, but it is absolutely not. So, but until you experiment with it and remove it and understand how to act in spite of and around it and grow when it's out of the way, I think it's really hard to even start.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Bron, we're at the end of our podcast episode, and I just wanted to say how great this conversation has been, and I can feel for myself and also, for the audience, how beneficial all of this is, particularly around the inner critic and gathering personal power and exploring some of these gendered workplaces and how to navigate that. So I would love for you to talk about how, if somebody really resonates with what you've been sharing today, how they can get hold of you, have a coffee date with you. I know you love your coffee dates, and and potentially work with you in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm relatively easy to find. My name is Bron Stephens with a PH in Stephens. And if you plug that into LinkedIn or your browser, bronstephens.com, you'll find me. I actively invite everyone on every platform to have coffee dates with me constantly. So please, I invite you to do the same, and your listeners to do the same. I think that will help you decide whether or not you even want to explore working with me. And I don't work with anyone that I haven't had a coffee date with, because I think that you've got to have a good connection with a coach, right? And if you don't want to work with me, you still just get to have a cool conversation and we get to meet a cool human. Like, I love anyone who's ever been my friend on LinkedIn knows that I regularly reach out to random strangers and go like, hi, do you want to have a coffee date? Because I like meeting cool humans. Like, I'm a giant nerd. I know it's uncool. I make friends like a 5-year-old. I'm aware of this. Like, I'm like, be my friend. But it's very effective. You build a great network.
Very effective.
You have incredible humans that come into your world. It's how we met. I go, why wouldn't you have a coffee date? But yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, I'm very easy to find. Just use my name and I will come up.
Beautiful. Well, Bron, thank you so much for spending this time with me today and for the words of wisdom that you have shared with the audience. I can't wait to get this episode out into the world. And thank you.
Thank you so much.